James Day, public television pioneer and chairman of the CUNY TV Advisory Board, passed away in April 2008. His legacy includes the series Day at Night, which aired for 130 episodes beginning in 1973. The program features interviews with many of the great thinkers and achievers of the 20th century. These 30-year-old programs have been restored. The interviews remain fresh and relevant today, exploring issues that are still important to society. Showing them again is CUNY TV's tribute to Jim and his contributions to public television.
Victor Borge bills himself as the unmelancholy Dane, a description that modestly understates the laughter and joy this pianist turned comedian has brought to millions around the world. If his father, who played the violin in the Royal Danish Symphony, hoped for a son to follow in his musical footsteps, this son was not one to follow in anyone's footsteps. Long before he fled the Nazi occupation of his homeland, Victor Borge found the magic and the fortune to be made from combining a talent for music with a facile wit and a sense of the absurd. And as if to prove that every Dane has at least two sides to his character, he found time between world tours, one-man shows, command performances, and television specials to start, of all things, a highly successful business marketing frozen Cornish hens. Mr. Borge, I'm going to interrupt you just a moment because I want to ask you about your one-man shows, what you've performed before all kinds of audiences all over the world. You performed before royalty, before heads of state.
You mean before before we had them, or before them?
No. We've
Oh, I see.
I want to ask you to imagine what you think it might be like if you performed your one-man show for a very select audience, made up of, let's say, Bach, Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, Brahms, Mozart, even throw Debussy in there. How do you think they would receive your show? Individually?
Sitting down, I guess, first. And I think I could compare it with an audience or some people that have had an audience. For instance, when I did a luncheon performance for the New York Philharmonic some years ago, when Bruno Walter and Metropolis and all the leading musicians in New York and names, you name them, were all there, sat with napkins in front of their faces, not because they wanted to hide themselves, but I think it was from laughter that they wanted. Yeah, I think the composers would have done the same, because when I perform, for instance, with symphony orchestras, which I do very often, I conduct the evening, and then in between I will do some of my piano things, and of course they are the first one to grasp the humor and the depth of the humor in it. And they times they break their instruments, you know.
They do?
Yes, not deliberately, I guess. But these are my, you know, it's cliche, my best audience, as we normally say. And I think that the composers would also, I mean, I have played.
Well, they were men of humor, were they not? We've
Of
somehow
course, some of them.
handed them as though they were men of great stern, mean, and
Yes, that's the way they have been writing about them.
you see these heads, these busts of them,
Yeah.
they look terribly serious.
Yeah, I wonder, we never see their bodies. I wonder why.
Which one would you choose to perform before if you had that selection to make? Which one do you think would be most appreciative of the great composers that you yourself
That
play
I
and
don't
perform?
know. I don't know, because what I would do would, of course, not ridicule this particular person. And I don't ridicule, I just make fun of. There's a big
There is a difference
between making fun of and fun with. And I have fun with, not of. For instance, when I play with the symphony orchestra, I never use the orchestra as a scapegoat or as a gimmick. I do it with them and for them. You see, and the same would be the same with the composer. I have a young singer who has been with me now for a couple of years, and we do some travesty, you know, on opera singing, and I accompany her, and all I do are the things that normally are being done, but I may underline them a little more. And the same when you do an opera parody. What do you do if it is not funny to see a 250-pound prima donna who's supposed to be 17 or 18 years old, you know, a little skinny thing? We don't.
It's almost a way of looking at it, as you say, underscoring it.
Exactly.
Something that we all see, but
of course
we blind ourselves to the humor sometimes because we are expected to take it quite
If
seriously.
people only knew what is being said by, for instance, singers during an opera, doing the most dramatic thing, where they whisper to each other and sometimes try to get to lose their mind, you know. And if people knew what takes place in the minds of musicians, for instance, when they perform, or I think that it would enlighten them quite a lot, and I think it would justify many of the things I do.
I talked with one distinguished musician and asked him what went on in his mind when he played, and he told me it was a sheer concentration upon the music, which it required. There are some musicians where apparently this is not always the case then.
Well, there are certainly musicians who, when they concentrate on it, they're frightened.
Frightened?
Yeah, they get frightened. One of the things that ruined my career as a concert pianist, so to speak, was fright. Because if I would concentrate on what comes next, or when does that cadenza now, does it begin with a C sharp or an F? I mean, it would drive me out of my mind, and I couldn't go through these things. I did it for a while, but I thought, this is going to be my future? I know, you know very well also, that some of the great pianists of our time, like the Horowitz, have gone through hell, you know, sometime before a concert and during it, and they don't want to perform. They hate it. And I think it is terrible that people have to perform, and nervousness or circumstances take away maybe 30–40% of their ability. I think that doesn't make much sense.
What do you do about nervousness, or are you without nervousness?
No, I'm terribly nervous, of course.
Before you go on for one of your own performances?
Depending, of course, what kind of performance I do.
I'm thinking
if I play what we call straight, and for instance, when I play with the orchestra, which I often do when I conduct it from the piano, we'll do some Gershwin, maybe the concerto in F, or we will do some special arrangement. I am terribly nervous.
And nothing you can do about it.
There's nothing you can do about it. Or I can do about it in that case. There's something you can do.
Yes, I see. You began playing the piano at the age of what, 4, 5, did you not, in Copenhagen?
Yes. Well, whenever I could reach. And
whenever you could reach.
keyboard.
Were you encouraged or forced to play the piano?
No, I
Your
wasn't
father was a
forced.
musician. Of
I
course,
was almost forced not to by the neighbors.
He was a musician who played in the Royal Symphony, was he not?
Yes, he was there for 33 years.
As a violinist?
Yes.
Why?
Actually, he played viola.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Why did you take up the piano, or did it take you up?
Because my father used the violin all the time.
I see. A good enough reason. Then you became.
I told you, he was there 33 years.
Yes, I see.
As a matter of fact, we hardly recognized him when he came home.
You did become a concert pianist, as you've said.
Yes.
And played for how many years?
Until now.
I mean, you were more or less,
concerts?
yes.
Oh, I don't know.
You were more or less a child. You were a child prodigy.
I
weren't
was
you?
a child prodigy. Yes. I'm not that any longer.
I see. It must be something of a handicap to be a child prodigy.
Yes, particularly when you aren't anymore.
Yes, of course.
It has its advantages, of course, but it also has its disadvantages. The disadvantages is that, or rather the advantage is that you are featured, but you do not accept that while it happens, really, because you don't know the difference. You see, it's only afterward, when you are not featured anymore.
That becomes more difficult.
Then it
then,
becomes
yes,
very
because
difficult.
more is expected of you, I suppose.
But I changed from, in other words, when I was going to make my own life and support myself, I had pupils. I was supposed to be a very good teacher, they said.
Wow.
Yes.
Absolutely straight, too.
Oh, yes. You see, the funny thing is about humor, there's a funny thing about humor, is that it is very serious. The only thing that is funny is when it's not humorous. because then it becomes funny, you see.
Odd, funny? When it's not funny, it's odd, or
No,
not funny?
Now, if you can repeat what I said first, then I can continue.
I don't think I can.
No, humor itself is not funny. It is the seriousness that makes humor. I mean, a very serious situation, one of the standard things is a person falls in a banana peel, for instance. Now, that is darn serious, isn't it? But you can't help laughing if you see it on the stage, if somebody does it. If somebody does something terribly serious, then it is hilariously funny. In other words, if I come in on the stage and I am going to play the beginning of the Tchaikovsky piano concerto, and I'm sitting on a bench, on a piano bench. Normally a pianist sits on an upholstered bench or stool, you know, that they can elevate and whatever. Now, I have seen this happen, and I'm doing it myself. I'm not doing it anymore because I hurt my arm doing it, but I used to do it. Now, this pianist came in and sat on a polished wooden bench, you know, and was used to the leather bench, which would not make him scoot, you see. And he did the first chords of the Tchaikovsky piano concerto. Boom, 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 and he slid right off the bench. Now, this is damn serious.
Yes, it is.
Yes, but when I do it, ha ha ha, it's hilariously funny. But it was done, actually. And some...
Well, I doubt that people laughed when he did it.
Oh, no, they were shocked, of course.
Absolutely.
But when I do it, I don't think they're shocked.
It's partly what you expect, isn't it?
But you see, you have to do it. What do we have? Don't we have a lot of things with people with silk hats and funerals and in the vaudeville, you know, the funeral attendants, you know, the sketches, and it has to be, the more serious it is, the more humor there is to be found in it. Death in itself is, of course, not particularly funny, but there is no situation that can be serious enough to not have a glimpse of humor in it. Because I consider humor to be between the, well, I'm not prepared to say these things, so I'm stuttering a little, but it is quite an interesting subject. A man in efficiency, no man is perfect. Can we agree with that?
Absolutely.
With all respect, of course.
Most especially.
And for the producers and the directors. The difference between where we stop and perfection is where humor sets in. In other words, if some persons are 70% perfect, 90%, 92%.
It's that gap in between.
The gap in between is where hilarity begins. This is where we cannot. I mean, you can take. Pardon.
I'm sorry.
I wonder who was interrupting.
I was going to take you back to Copenhagen. You may not want to go back there right now. I wondered where hilarity set in with you with respect to...
When I was born.
Of course. But there was some point in your career, and different stories are written. You winked at some ladies in the front row of the audience or during a serious concert or something. Now, I suspect these stories are apocryphal, but there was a point where you switched from serious music to serious music with humor. Or there wasn't. Where was the gap?
No, I didn't switch. It happened very slowly, you know, just like you build a road or you build anything we do is nothing is suddenly.
It didn't happen one day.
It couldn't. Of course it couldn't. But I think it is a matter of chemistry. I think I was created like anybody else, but with an ability, musical ability, and a sense of humor, which is a chemistry of which I consist, partly, right?
That came with the equipment, more.
That came with the equipment, yes. And that's what happened. And these two things have finally got together, you know, and become...
And you became the leading comedian in Denmark.
Well, I would... when you ask me who is your favorite composers, I will not do that. Or who is your favorite actor, I will never tell you that, because I might hurt somebody who is just as favorite. Therefore, I cannot answer that question.
I'm sorry, I didn't put it as a question.
I know,
of course.
but I couldn't give you an answer to it, even if it wasn't a question.
I see, all right.
Or if it weren't a question.
But in your comedy in Denmark, I am told, I read, that you did make fun of the Nazis, which were a threat at that point to Denmark, to all of Europe?
Well, may I refer to what I said before, that the more serious the situation,
Yes.
the more it calls for humor and the more it hits. The
But
more, the more there is to...
and
Well,
you felt it called for humor, of course.
no, humor is a medium. You cannot create humor. Humor cannot be created. Humor is a medium with which you can create situations. Humor is to the humorist what the brush is to the painter, and what the pen is to the poet or the composer. You create with humor. Now, depending, of course, upon the degree of artistry there is in the humorist, as it depends upon the degree of artistry there is in the composer or the painter. It can be better or it can be less good. But humor can devastate. I think that it has been used many times, as you know, in politics. Churchill, Roosevelt, some of the great. The lack of humor in Stalin and Hitler has shown the results also, hasn't it?
Yes.
And humor you can kill people with humor. You can avoid wars, you can create wars, you can ridicule to the point that people commit suicide. I mean, all depending on how it is being used and with what strength and with what intention, you say. You can ridicule, let us talk, not to bring in the political situation, you know, that we have in the United States right now. I mean, the source for humor, for cartoons and for stickers and all kinds of things, the whole thing might be blown away with humor or with ridiculous...
Certainly pointing up its essential absurdity.
Exactly. Yes. And the more serious the crime, the more serious the situation, the more... Again, I come back to my statement before. And humor is I remember, for instance, my father was being buried. My father was 62 when I was born, so I actually jumped a generation. Yeah, he should have waited, but I guess he couldn't. And he lived to be 85, and my mother was very much in love with him. And at the funeral, I stood and held my mother's arm, and some colleagues from the Royal Orchestra was carrying the casket, and they had played, you know, some quartet, the Tchaikovsky. And my mother was, of course, gone completely. And some of the colleagues of my father were standing next to the casket there. And some of them looked terribly funny because there was a little fellow, an oboist, who had a silk hat on that was much too small. He was a little fat man. There was a terribly tall man who played the bassoon, who had a hat that was much too big for him, and it was way down over his ears. And I mean, that sight there was so hilarious. And I said to Mother, if Father could only have opened his eyes and seen this, he would have died laughing anyway. And my mother started laughing. I mean, so you see...
Was your father a man who really enjoyed...
Oh, yes, he was very witty. Yeah. And you talked about the Nazis. You cannot fight a situation like that with words. You must have more than just words, because you can't do it scientifically. You have to have something that goes deeper than words, and that is, I think, humor. Humor is one of the things that can create things in a man or in a woman, in a person, that nothing else. It's like tickling somebody. I remember once in Denmark we had a problem. We had a tax. They wouldn't accept a regular 10% tax from my performances when I finally went to the stage and did theatrical performances, because they said it was variety or something. Concerts were 10%. If I played a concert, it was 10%. But when I did theatrical things like I do now, it would be 20%. And I went to court with it, and I insisted that all I did was exactly the same thing. When I played the piano, I would touch some muscles in you or some feelings in you that would make you either cry or feel good or feel bad, you know, or resent it. And when I talked, I would do the same thing, but probably activating other muscles or other things in your body. And why one should be 20% worth 20% and the other should be only 10%, I thought was unfair. And I won the case.
You won the case?
Yeah, I had to pay 20 for both.
I see.
No, well, I won the case.
Of course, of course. The Nazi invasion of Denmark is what brought you to America, drove you to America, I suppose, but you did make your choice to come to New York, and you refer to that as the day you were born.
The day I was reborn, yes.
Reborn.
Actually.
Why did you choose America?
I didn't, but the ship went here.
I see, the one
Yes.
you got on
And
came
I
here.
I didn't have influence. As a matter of fact, if I had influence, I would still have come to America
of course.
because, for two reasons. Where else could you go at that time? And that was the country to which I had my ticket.
I see.
And I was fortunate, of course. I was.
But earning a living here was a bit difficult in the beginning, wasn't it?
It is always a difficult thing. isn't
Well,
it?
I was thinking, because
It was impossible because I couldn't speak the language, and nobody knew me.
as a performer this would be difficult unless you played the piano, of course.
Yeah, but where you just don't go around just playing a piano. You have to know somebody first. And I remember I was introduced in. Somebody told me to go down to Florida because to Palm Beach and maybe get involved with some of the big balls and parties there. You know, I could entertain or play. Because I couldn't talk, I couldn't say a word, and I went. They sent me to a local agent, and he said, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, as well as I could say it, I play the piano." He said, "They were talked that he was going to get me a job at one of the big festivals or something like that." And he said, "What do you play?" I said, "Play the piano." He said, "Well, if somebody asks you to play, for instance, the Blue Danube, what do you do?" So I say, "Well, I play the Blue Danube, of course." I say, "Okay, let me hear it." I said, "Do you have some music?" And he gave me some music. It wasn't the blues, whatever it was. And I played it upside down, you know. And then I turned the page around and I said, "I'm sorry." And I did. He threw me out of the office.
He did?
Yeah.
Didn't appreciate it?
No, he said, "You can't even read music."
Your first break came with Bing Crosby, I gather.
Yes.
Did you really chauffeur a family out west to get out west?
I didn't have a family.
I mean, not your family, but a family.
Oh, yes, I
the-
chauffeured.
yeah.
No, it was some friends of mine who had a daughter. Their daughter was going to get married in San Francisco and would like to have a car out there. And there was my chance was to come to the West Coast, where Hollywood, of course, loomed. And having made movies, I thought, when I get out there,
That'd do it.
just wait till I get out
Yeah.
there. I'm still waiting.
You only made one movie, as a matter of fact, didn't you?
That wasn't a movie, that was a catastrophe.
It was. But
That was High on Higher, called High on Higher, but they booked me as I was playing a Sir Victor Fitzroy Victor, an English nobleman. I could hardly speak English.
How did you learn to speak English?
I didn't.
It's been a real asset, hasn't it?
I'm still trying.
I ask that, as I'm sure you know, because the research material on you indicates that you went to movies when you first landed
Yes.
in New York. Is that so?
Yeah, I went to 42nd Street. I think for 15 cents one could sit and see 3 movies, and you could sit for 24 hours if you wanted to. And I sat sometimes for almost 24 hours because it repeated, and I could see the action with the words, and I would memorize the words and say them with the actors, and nobody would be disturbed because hardly anybody else in the theater. And that was. I don't think I learned actually to speak English, but it helped a lot.
You must have learned a lot of other things as well.
I sure did.
Were they useful?
Well, I tried some of them, but for instance, once I would pass a pretty girl in the street and say, "Hi, babe." She must have seen the same movie because she said, "Scram bum," or something like that. It's also there.
I've read that you're a perfectionist, that you really feel well only when you know you've done extremely well, and you get depressed if you don't feel that you've done your best. Is that so?
No, it is not exactly so. I don't think it's a matter of feeling that you have done your best, because once you do that, then there is nothing like your best. If you have done your best, there's nothing left over.
There should be something left
There
over
should
then.
be something left
Always
over.
something.
That doesn't mean you shouldn't try to do what the situation calls for, but I think that if one has done one's best, one has finished somehow, you know. It might be a little deep, it might be a little out of context of what we are really talking about. Maybe I mean
It's like
something
walking off the
different.
stage and saying, that's life, I've done it.
Yes.
I've done my best and there's
I
nothing
have
left.
never been completely satisfied with anything I have done, in spite of the fact I have been encouraged, let me put it that way.
Yes.
For instance, if I improvise, I have never improvised to the extent that I have said myself, this was marvelous, but I have said, this was nice, this was, but had I only done such and such, it would have been. You know, I always have that little thing left over. And I also have a feeling, for instance, very gratified feeling when I finish a performance and some of the people come afterwards or later to say, I wish you had played some more, or I wish they had lasted longer, or I wish they had some. It's a great satisfaction to know
They
that
wanted
somebody
more.
want more of whatever you have to offer.
Yes.
And granted, there are people probably who say we didn't want any of it, but I mean, that's
I
their
doubt
own fault. They
that. I
should have
doubt
been
that
there
very
in
much,
the
yes.
first place. But it is like if you drive an automobile that can go 140 miles, good to know, you know, but you don't drive 140 miles. You have that excess, you have a little extra, and it's good to know that you could possibly do better next time. Or there's something that could always be improved. I'm very sensitive with letters, for instance. I often take much too much time to write a good letter. I'm very fond of good letters because I think that the way we express ourselves in the letter mirror ourselves and our many things that otherwise doesn't come to the fore. But in the letter, many people contradict themselves, actually. You know what they mean, I think.
Yes.
Like, for instance, a letter from a lady who said to me that she said she had such a marvelous time at the show, and she hadn't laughed so hard since her husband died. Now, of course, we know. I couldn't write a thing
You know
like
what
that.
she meant.
Of course I know
Yes.
it, and it was very sweet. And,
Yes.
it was
But saying precisely what you do mean is a great satisfaction.
exactly, when I read the letter over again, and I finally sign it, and I say, this I could have said a little better. That, in other words, I'm very critical, particularly with myself.
Thank
But
you.
I forgive easily.
Thank you very much, Mr. Borge.